So let's talk about this exciting time we're in,
Cool.
where we are pulling in the new creation. People
Yes.
are waking up. And we'll get to the ET stuff because that's one of my, but that's one of my passions. But just before we get there, how do you see this moment in time of awakening? And you talk about 2030, 2035. So yeah, the relative creation is going somewhere. What do you see?
So in my terminology and understanding, I would describe it as we are moving collectively from a third density vibratory state to a fourth density vibratory state. So this is slightly different than the dimensions as a lot of people talk about it. I prefer the system of the densities because I think it's more accurate. It has less room for misinterpretation. It's just very clear. This is based, or I was exposed to this first in the Law of One.
Raw material, yes.
Yes. So fourth density being the vibration of love, transparency, union between beings, interconnectedness, sharing, service. And so we are moving from a very isolated, all about me kind of paradigm, which is reflected in our corporations and our structures and our architecture throughout. And this is kind of what's crumbling and disappearing and making way, being forced upon itself, a level, a heightened density, which forces us to become transparent and awake.
Right.
So we're kind of catching up with planet Earth, which is who is already entered into this fourth density vibration several decades ago. And what we see today is this this forced shift of us trying to figure out how to catch the train. The train is leaving, and one arm is left on the station for a lot of people, but we want to catch this train. And you know, everything will change with this. Like, it's inevitable, everything will change. I use 2035 as a date because I feel that that will be roughly the period where we can say that pretty much all systems have changed and been overthrown, and disclosure.
Did you get that as a download?
You could say that, yeah.
As a vision possibility?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's variation in that. There's different timelines, obviously, so, or not so obviously, but there are different timelines. So it depends on each individual what they'll experience, but roughly for the crowd that I speak to most of the time, I estimate that around 2035, we can really look back and say we are in a different world, and we are no longer just earthly. There is, there's
a galactic awareness.
There's a galactic awareness and relationships that are starting an absorption, an intergalactic absorption that begins, as well as our structures falling away and our power structures disappearing and all that.
Right, and free energy and all the things that we need to be a really evolving civilization.
Yep, and some of these things will start to happen very soon.
Yeah.
But around 2035, we could really begin to see that this is, like, we've made it, so to speak, hopefully.
No, I think I'm on that timeline, hopefully. But, I'm very involved in the disclosure movement. I help the Contact in the Desert experience. I mean, I've interviewed all those people, going back to Bud Hopkins and John Mack, if you know those people. Do you know those people? John Mack was a psychiatrist at Harvard, started to interview people having ET experience and said, no, these people are not crazy. They're having an experience that can't be qualified in our sense of reality.
Nice.
And that opened up a real official way of understanding that what we're meeting, if we want to get into the ET stuff, is nothing we know in terms of human consciousness. I mean, that's been my experience in my contact. It is, and you've talked about how, even though you're prepared, it still is a little freaky when they show up at your door, right? So let's talk about what we need to do to prepare, because disclosures happen. I mean, there's stuff in the sky all the time, and there's people having vision and interaction. So what do we need to do as a human race, we're not totally human, to meet the other and embrace this? We need an internal shift and a different level of vibration. And talk about what you see.
The most important thing, like, we could get into fancy stuff, but the rudimentary basics that people will have to understand and have to integrate first is the capacity to handle this transparency of consciousness that pervades.
What do you mean by transparency?
So let me go back to the densities real quick. What does density mean? Density means how densely packed each, if you will, cubic square inch of the particular illusory environment that we find ourselves in
The vibration
packed,
of
is
like
packed with light.
this, yeah.
Yeah, like how much of God's light is squeezed consciously, so to speak, into each aspect of this environment, right? So as the dreamscape that you could call life, as most people see it as matter or as the physical universe, but really it's a dreamscape in consciousness. The higher the vibration of that, the denser it is with that light of consciousness. So, like I was saying earlier, planet Earth has been already shifted into what could be categorized as a fourth density vibratory state where it's all about love and transparency. Now, by transparency, like you have to apply this across the board. Transparency, I don't just mean being able to share something with someone when you're feeling it. That's an aspect of it. That's a very
That's a
relational.
basic emotional drama aspect of which is important. You need to do that.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So to be transparent with others is definitely a very important aspect of that. But you have to see this transparency thing across the board. Like, it is like everything is obscured from each other currently, or it's becoming less and less so. But everyone is in their own bubble, in their own veil. This applies to corporation, hierarchical structures, government, our relationships, our own feelings from ourselves to ourselves. There's a lot of veils. These veils are being busted wide open, whether we like it or not, whether we're ready or not. Suddenly, people will be able to see each other's like true intentions and feelings and emotions, and understand why they're here more clearly, and see through the lies and the deceit. So, what's being forced upon our planet is this transparency, and I think, again, like I said, we can get into the fancy stuff too, or
like
the
when you
fun
say
stuff,
fancy stuff, what do you mean?
we want to talk about spaceships or like whatever new money systems or. But what's most important to understand for everyone is that we have to integrate within ourselves these different levels of our consciousness, because otherwise we won't be able to successfully integrate the experiences that are happening anyway.
We won't be able to meet the other if we still have stuff veiled in ourselves.
Exactly.
It
would cause a disruption of our cohesion, our sense of cohesion, because it's like someone being exposed to shock or a war, or it's similar to that. If you're exposed to too much love, it can cause PTSD if you're not ready for that vibration. And so if there's too much telepathy, too much transparency, and you're afraid, you're fundamentally afraid because you're identified with the small self and it hasn't been integrated, and there is a lack of transparency and mastery within one's own field, then that field will go into a shock state in a way.
That's because we've been so stuck in our human drama and our story and our veiled lives that when we're confronted with something that blows that away, we freak out because we've identified with that. Is that what you're saying? So how do you suggest we meet the galactic other? I mean,
to do the work, I mean, there's no other way. We have to do the work. We have to observe ourselves, get to know ourselves. As Ra states, the first step is to know oneself, know your patterns, know why you react the way you react. Why are you feeling what you're feeling? Become aware of your patterns, your addictions, your lack beliefs. And through that knowledge, then accept yourself. Step 2 is accept yourself. First step is know yourself. Second step is accept yourself. And only when you do that, there's a healing, there's an integration that happens with all these elements that you bring transparency to. Only then can step 3 be begun, and that is really the spiritual path, which is become the creator.
what does that mean, to become the creator?
It depends on what level we're talking about it, but it simply means to begin the ascension process of really looking up, if you will, looking up towards what's possible, looking up to your true self, looking inward towards your true self, and becoming more of the creator and emptying oneself of all these false ideas and false sense of self.
I get that, and I think that's great, but and I'm really happy we're talking about this, because I talk to a lot of spiritual teachers, and I bring up the idea of ET realities or whatever, and they say, look, you don't need to go there. Why bring that in? This doesn't have anything to do with spirituality, but I think it does, and I think you have a key to why it does.
Well, a lot of these beings, and I can't vouch for all civilizations, but a lot of these beings come from a higher density. So there's this whole there's this whole alliance, there's multiple alliances that are available as guides, as space holders that have traversed this path that we have through the densities that are resonating at a higher frequency natively and that are able to guide us and help us. So it's not that aliens per se are, define what spirituality is, but it's that they are beings just like us, some of which have traversed through these higher densities, and they know these lessons, they know how to handle this process. And their perception and their energy and their consciousness is just so much more capable of perceiving these processes that it will be helpful to without surrendering sovereignty, to appreciate those teachers and those guides, and to pay attention and to be ready for that to begin with.
Well, you're sort of from there. I mean, on a relative level, I'm more.
Yes, I'm in disguise.
Yeah, tell us about where. I mean, not that it matters, but what do you resonate with as far as like what level of or where beings are from?
I'll just say that natively, if I had to categorize it, I would say it's a late 6th density vibration. And so if people want to really get familiar with that frequency, I recommend reading The Law of One Material, Ra being a late 6th density entity.